When you take your sick pet to the vet, what's the first question they ask? What has their diet been like? Usually, the issue affecting your pet is related to their diet, and the solution is to alter it. So why don't human doctors ask the same of us? Sometimes they do, but the suggestions are often misinformed. You're familiar with the American dietary guidelines, right? Everything in moderation, get enough fiber, don't eat too much fat, eat all your veggies, breads and starches are the staple of all meals, and such taglines as, this cereal is part of a balanced breakfast. You've also seen all of the recommendations on fat intake too. Low-fat dairy, now with less fat, fat makes you fat, 25% less fat, eating fat causes heart disease, watch your cholesterol, etc., etc. But what makes fat so bad? What if I told you that since low-fat passed in the 1970s, that instances of heart disease, obesity, and type 2 diabetes have actually increased dramatically, so dramatically that you can almost pinpoint the exact moments when the incline began. And that started in the 1970s. But we need to go back a little bit in order to understand why low-fat was even considered to be a viable way to treat heart disease in the first place. That begins in the 1950s, when there was an epidemic of heart disease in relatively healthy Americans. Those Americans all had elevated cholesterol, which led John Goffman to develop his lipid hypothesis. This hypothesis proposed that cholesterol led to atherosclerosis, and that high saturated fat intake caused high cholesterol, and therefore caused heart disease. In 1953, Ansel Keys performed and published his 7-country study, which you've probably heard of, as it's the main study experts turn to when promoting low-fat diets. Unfortunately, this study wasn't performed correctly. The countries that Keys used for his research were not randomly chosen. There was no control group, countries that did not meet his bias were purposefully left out, and those that did were included. For example, Chile was not included, even though their heart disease rates were high while fat intake was low, and the Maasai people's high-fat diet but low frequency of heart disease was also omitted. The nail is finally set in fat's coffin when the U.S. Senator George McGovern institutes dietary goals for the country based on Key's study in 1977. These guidelines are chosen by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the era of low fat really starts to take off. From 1961 to 1978, diet programs like Weight Watchers, Atkins and Nutrisystem, and Scarsdale were everywhere. In the 1980s, companies like Snackwell's, products like I Can't Believe It's Not Butter Margarine, Aspartame, Liposuction, Jenny Craig, and meal supplements are born, effectively increasing the carbohydrate and synthetic fat intake of the American populace and offering alternative methods of weight loss other than diet alteration. By 1990, type 2 diabetes is noticed in children. In 1996, 40% of youth are trying to lose weight. In the 2000s, a global obesity epidemic is declared. In 2015, diabetes is the 7th leading cause of death in the U.S., and heart disease is the first, and low fat still reigns. It's not until 2011 that the research of a man named Dr. Ivan Franz is discovered in an unmarked box in his basement by his children following his death in 2009. Following the publishing of Ansel Keys' 7-country study, Dr. Ivan Franz conducted the same study, but properly, and found a contradictory conclusion. His study and its findings were buried by Keys and the scientific community because they didn't support Keys' conclusion. It's not until 2016 that the study is performed again, and it's found that replacing saturated fats with vegetable oils increase the risk of death from heart disease, which directly contradicts the low-fat dogma that's been promoted since John Goffman's lipid hypothesis in 1953. The low-fat movement was introduced as a cure to heart disease, but as of 2015, it is the leading cause of death worldwide, with 8.75 million deaths to its name that year. Second place was stroke at 6.24 million deaths, just over 2.5 million less. But the masses don't know why, because the experts have skimmed the facts.